Throughout history, there have been moments that shook America to its core, days so terrifying they left an indelible mark on the nation's soul. From devastating attacks to shocking assassinations, these events not only changed the course of history but also redefined what it means to be American. In this video, we'll explore 8 of the scariest days in America, moments that tested the nation's resilience, unity, and spirit. These are the stories of fear, courage, and the enduring strength of a people who refuse to be broken. So, buckle up as we take you through these pivotal moments, days that remind us of the fragility of peace and the power of hope. In 1814, during the third year of the War of 1812, England turned its attention to the United States. Having just defeated Napoleon Bonaparte's France, the British now focused their military might on reclaiming territories in the still weakly defended young nation. On August 24, 1814, after a decisive victory at the Battle of Bladensburg, British forces marched into Washington, D.C. In a shocking act of retaliation, they set fire to key government buildings, including the White House and the U.S. Capitol. President James Madison and most of his administration were forced to flee, spending the night in Brookville, Maryland, a town now remembered as the United States Capitol for a day. For Americans, this was a terrifying and humiliating moment. Just 31 years after gaining independence in the Revolutionary War, they watched as their national capital burned to the ground, occupied by their former colonial rulers. However, heavy rains the next day helped extinguish the flames, sparing the city from complete destruction. While the burning of Washington was a devastating blow, it also served as a rallying cry. The attack galvanized the U.S. military, which went on to repel further British advances. The war finally ended with the Treaty of Ghent, ratified on February 17, 1815. For many Americans, this victory marked a second war of independence, solidifying the nation's sovereignty and resilience. After 5 grueling years of the Civil War, Americans looked to President Abraham Lincoln to lead the nation toward peace, healing, and unity. But on April 14, 1865, just weeks into his second term, tragedy struck. Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth, a bitter Confederate sympathizer, while attending a play at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. With a single gunshot, the hope for a peaceful reunification of the nation was shattered. Lincoln, who had advocated for a compassionate approach toward the defeated South, often urging to let the rebels up easy, was gone. His death left the country in shock and despair. Northerners blamed Southerners for the assassination, reigniting tensions and fears that the Civil War might not truly be over. Many worried that the hard-won progress toward ending slavery and rebuilding the nation could unravel. The legalized enslavement of people, which had torn the country apart, still loomed as a haunting possibility in the minds of many Americans. Lincoln's assassination marked a dark turning point in American history. It not only robbed the nation of a visionary leader but also deepened the divisions that would take decades to heal. The end of World War I in 1918 ushered the United States into an era of unprecedented economic prosperity. The Roaring Twenties were a time of excess and optimism, but beneath the surface, trouble was brewing. While American cities thrived thanks to rapid industrial growth, the nation's farmers faced financial ruin due to the overproduction of crops. At the same time, an unregulated stock market and reckless investments fueled by post-war optimism created a dangerous bubble. On October 29, 1929, the bubble burst. That day, known as Black Tuesday, stock prices, artificially inflated by speculative investments, plummeted. Panic spread from Wall Street to Main Street, as nearly every American who owned stock desperately tried to sell. But with everyone selling and no one buying, stock values continued to freefall. The consequences were catastrophic. Banks that had made risky investments collapsed, taking businesses and family savings with them. Within days, millions of Americans who had once considered themselves prosperous found themselves standing in unemployment lines and breadlines. The stock market crash of 1929 marked the beginning of the Great Depression, a 12-year period of economic hardship and poverty. It wasn't until the New Deal programs of President Franklin D. Roosevelt and the industrial demands of World War II that the nation finally began to recover. In December 1941, most Americans looked forward to the holidays, confident that their nation's isolationist policies would keep them out of the growing conflicts in Europe and Asia. But by the end of December 7, 1941, that confidence was shattered. Early that morning, Japanese forces launched a surprise attack on the U.S. Navy's Pacific Fleet stationed at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. In just a few hours, the devastation was staggering. 2,345 U.S. military personnel and 57 civilians were killed, while 1,247 military personnel and 35 civilians were wounded. The Pacific Fleet was crippled, with 4 battleships, 2 destroyers, and 188 aircraft destroyed. The next day, images of the attack dominated newspapers across the nation. Americans realized that with the Pacific Fleet decimated, a Japanese invasion of the U.S. West Coast was a terrifying possibility. Fear spread rapidly, leading President Franklin D. Roosevelt to issue an executive order for the internment of over 117,000 Japanese Americans, a dark chapter in U.S. history. President Roosevelt famously called December 7th a date which will live in infamy. The attack on Pearl Harbor thrust the United States into World War II, ending any hope of remaining isolated from the global conflict. On the evening of October 22, 1962, the Cold War tensions that had long simmered between the United States and the Soviet Union reached a boiling point. President John F. Kennedy addressed the nation on television, confirming the unthinkable: the Soviet Union was placing nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from the coast of Florida. The threat was immediate and terrifying. These missiles were capable of striking anywhere in the continental United States, putting millions of lives at risk. Kennedy warned that the launch of any Soviet nuclear missile from Cuba would be considered an act of war, demanding a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union. As the nation braced for the worst, American schoolchildren practiced futile duck and cover drills, hiding under their desks and being told, "Don't look at the flash." Meanwhile, Kennedy and his closest advisors engaged in a high-stakes game of atomic diplomacy, negotiating with Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev to defuse the crisis. After 13 tense days, the Cuban Missile Crisis ended peacefully. The Soviets agreed to remove their missiles from Cuba in exchange for the U.S. removing its missiles from Turkey and pledging not to invade Cuba. While the immediate threat was averted, the fear of nuclear Armageddon left a lasting mark on the American psyche, a reminder of how close the world came to catastrophe. Just 13 months after steering the nation through the Cuban Missile Crisis, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated while riding in a motorcade through downtown Dallas, Texas. The shocking death of the young, charismatic leader sent waves of grief and fear across America and around the world. In the chaotic aftermath of the shooting, rumors spread rapidly. Erroneous reports suggested that Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, riding 2 cars behind Kennedy in the motorcade, had also been shot. These false reports only deepened the sense of panic and uncertainty. With Cold War tensions still at a fever pitch, many feared that Kennedy's assassination was part of a larger attack on the United States. These fears intensified when it was revealed that the accused assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, was a former U.S. Marine who had renounced his American citizenship and attempted to defect to the Soviet Union in 1959. The assassination of JFK left an indelible mark on the nation. Like the Pearl Harbor attack and the September 11, 2001, terror attacks, it became one of those defining moments in history where people would forever remember where they were when they heard the news. The loss of Kennedy not only ended a presidency filled with hope and promise, but also left a lingering sense of vulnerability and sorrow that still resonates today. On April 4, 1968, the world lost one of its most powerful voices for peace and justice. Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., the leader of the American Civil Rights Movement, was assassinated by a sniper in Memphis, Tennessee. His death came at a time when his words and nonviolent tactics, boycotts, sit-ins, and protest marches, were making significant strides toward racial equality. The night before his death, Dr. King delivered what would become his final sermon. In a moment that now seems prophetic, he said, "We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. And I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you. But I want you to know tonight that we, as a people, will get to the promised land." The assassination of the Nobel Peace Prize laureate sent shockwaves across the nation. In the days that followed, the civil rights movement, once rooted in nonviolence, erupted into riots, beatings, and unjust arrests. The murders of civil rights workers further deepened the sense of loss and anger. On June 8, 1968, the accused assassin, James Earl Ray, was arrested at a London airport. Ray admitted he had been trying to reach Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, a country then ruled by an oppressive white minority government. The details of the investigation led many Black Americans to fear that Ray was part of a larger conspiracy targeting civil rights leaders. Despite the tragedy, Dr. King's death galvanized the nation. The outpouring of grief and anger accelerated the fight against segregation and led to the passage of critical civil rights legislation, including the Fair Housing Act of 1968, part of President Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society initiative. Dr. King's legacy endures as a symbol of hope, courage, and the ongoing struggle for equality. His dream of a just and inclusive society continues to inspire generations. Before September 11, 2001, most Americans viewed terrorism as a distant threat, confident that the nation's vast oceans and powerful military would keep them safe. But on that fateful morning, that confidence was shattered forever. Members of the radical Islamic group Al-Qaeda hijacked 4 commercial airliners, turning them into weapons of terror. 2 planes crashed into the World Trade Center in New York City, causing both towers to collapse. A 3rd plane struck the Pentagon near Washington, D.C., while the 4th, United Airlines Flight 93, crashed in a field outside Pittsburgh after passengers bravely fought back against the hijackers. By the end of the day, 19 terrorists had killed nearly 3,000 people, injured over 6,000, and caused more than $10 billion in property damage. The attacks left the nation in shock and mourning. In the immediate aftermath, the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration grounded all commercial and private flights, fearing further attacks. For weeks, Americans looked to the skies with fear, and the airspace over North America remained closed to civilian aircraft for several days. The attacks triggered the War on Terror, leading to military campaigns in Afghanistan and Iraq against terrorist groups and regimes harboring them. Domestically, the U.S. enacted controversial laws like the Patriot Act of 2001, which expanded government surveillance and security measures, often at the cost of civil liberties. On November 10, 2001, President George W. Bush addressed the United Nations General Assembly, saying, "Time is passing. Yet, for the United States of America, there will be no forgetting September the 11th. We will remember every rescuer who died in honor. We will remember every family that lives in grief. We will remember the fire and ash, the last phone calls, the funerals of the children." The September 11th attacks joined Pearl Harbor and the Kennedy assassination as defining moments in American history, days that forever changed the nation and left people asking, "Where were you when?" These 8 scariest days in America are more than just moments in history. They are reminders of the challenges the nation has faced and the resilience it has shown. From the burning of Washington, D.C., to the horrors of 9/11, these events tested the courage and unity of the American people. But through the darkness, there has always been light. Each of these days sparked a response, whether it was the rebuilding of a nation, the fight for civil rights, or the pursuit of justice. They remind us that even in the face of fear, hope and determination can prevail. As we reflect on these defining moments, let's remember the lessons they taught us, that unity is our greatest strength, and that even in the darkest times, we can rise together. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more deep dives into history. Which of these days do you think had the most lasting impact? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and remember, history isn't just about the past, it's about the lessons we carry forward.